I've been at Google for over 11 years now, and I've been part of the open source team my time here. And I've been leading the Google Summer program. I really should go back and look at the exact date, but I think at this point, 6.5 years, I think is right. I think it's a long time. So I'm really excited to talk to all of you today because we're making changes ever to the program. This is the 18th year of the Summer Code. We started back in 2005. And so we've got a lot of really exciting changes. I think all of you are students, so this will definitely be interesting to y'all. But the cool thing is you can also tell some of your friends if maybe they're already graduated or they're not in school right now, that they now would be eligible to participate in GSoC as well. So we'll get started. The talk's probably going to be about 30 minutes. I'll leave it open for plenty of time for Q&A. Last year, I know we had lots of questions, which was great. I'd love for there to be a lot of questions. The worst thing is when you give a presentation, especially virtually, and nobody asks a question, and you're just kind of going, "Oh, did they fall asleep? What happened?" So feel free to ask questions. I'll probably just wait and do all the questions at the end. Latifah was kind enough to give me a list of questions that folks had asked last year during our session, and then also after the session is concluded. So I went and tried to incorporate a lot of those questions into this talk today to try to be proactive, to answer some of the things I know are going to be important to all of you. So let's get started. Oh, sorry.
Okay. There should be some graduates on this call as well. I did send it out to the entire community.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Good deal. So let me put that up right here. All right. And I did share slides with Latifah, and so she will be sharing those with all, I think, shortly. So if you want to share with other people, that's totally fine. And then also just to have them for reference, because we do have a bunch of slides, like links in there towards the end of the program, or end of the slide deck. So those will be very important to you as well. If y'all see me?
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Okay, great. All right, then I will just start presenting here. Okay. So today I'm going to talk to you about Google Summer. And first, the most important thing when we start talking about Google Summer Code is really about open source. Now, I know a lot of you are probably already familiar with exactly what is open source. So we'll just kind of go briefly into that. But it's computer software where the source code is distributed under an open source license. There are many different licenses. We're not going to talk about that today. Not my expertise at all. But these licenses allow anyone to come in and to study the code, to change it, to build upon it, improve it, and then to be able to distribute the software as they wish. Now, again, there's different codes, there are different licenses that have different restrictions, but they get into those details. This is a general idea of open source. And so open source is essentially the opposite of proprietary or closed source software. So whereas I always use Apple as an example, I love Apple, so I have a MacBook. It's not that I say anything bad about Apple, but Apple, for example, has closed source or proprietary software that they use, whereas many other tech companies are open source or have a lot of their source code that is open source. And what open source does is it really promotes collaboration, because it's all about having the code available that anybody can kind of add on to it. They can make it better. They can build more great things faster, right? If you have millions of people who have access to this code versus a group of 10 people, clearly millions of people are going to have a lot more ideas and a lot more input and also more time to be able to build something great off of the source code. And the other great thing about open source, which has been one of my favorite parts of being a part of this community for over 11 years, is that it's all about a community of dedicated developers from all over the world, from all walks of life, everyone at different stages of their career, of thousands of different projects that are out there that you can work on. So there really is something for everyone. Whether you're interested in kind of humanitarian projects, or you're interested in maths or robotics or biomedical science or more like end user application. There's all kinds of things. So, sometimes you may not find something that interests you right away, but trust me, it's out there. And so Google Code is a way to get a kind of more insight into communities so that people can kind of say, oh, here's a subset of tens of thousands of communities out there that I can work with, and look at the cool stuff they're doing. Oh, this is great. So it's a great way for developers to also down the kind of wide selection of open source projects. And I think some organizations here, sorry not to confuse you. One of the questions we get a lot, and last year as well, is essentially, why should I care about open source software? And that's a great question, right? The kind of philosophical reason is making the world better, because really the code is there that anybody can use it. You can make a lot of great things happen, and it can happen fast. Also, increasing your skills, right? You're going to be working on all kinds of projects. If you're in software development, you will use open source. You already have. You may not have known it, but you already have at some point. If you've been doing this for any time at all, and you will continue to use this in your career. If you go on to become a software developer at any company, tech company, or you will be using open source. So this is a great way. GSoC itself is a great way for you to build those skills, kind of learn the ins and outs before you even start your career. And of course, have fun, right? You're getting to meet a ton of people. You're going to build your network of developers. You're going to know people in Australia, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Canada. So you're going to get to know people all over the world. So really building that network is always essential at any stage in your life, especially now when you're in university and you're looking kind of towards the future, or if you just recently graduated, or if you're changing careers, if you're a little later in your job career path. But it's always great to have a network of people that you can talk to and can bounce ideas off. And who also are kind of keeping an eye out and say, hey, I know you were really interested in that thing, in this particular topic. I just heard about this job over here. Go check it out. So you obviously do a lot of networking now, but this is just another way to continue that, which of course leads into the final one. How do you get a job? All of these different tech companies, any company, they're using open source. And more large organizations realize how important open source is to their business. And they want to make sure that their developers know about open source. And so if you already participated in GSoC, you've already learned, by the time you finish your GSoC, you've already learned so many different skills that are going to make it that much more attractive to the recruiter or the person interviewing you for a job. Because you can say, hey, this is the code, this is the feature I built. This is whatever you work on GSoC. This is something I did. So you can show them that you have this skill to do the job. So that's really important, especially when you're coming out of your university program. So now let's go into a little bit more about GSoC itself. So what exactly, sorry, I keep saying GSoC. I will say GSoC much shorter. So it's an online international program designed to bring new contributors into open source software development. And in the program, the contributors get to be guided by mentors from these open source communities. So essentially, it's a mentorship program. And it's entirely online. It's always been online. So for 18 years, it's been online. It's not just something that's happened in the last 2 years. You've never had to go, in person to a particular location. Because the thing is, with open source, it is so distributed across the world. There are so many people in any given open source community who are in Europe, or they're in Asia, or they're in New Zealand, or in Africa. They're all over the world. So this is nothing unusual, right, for open source. You have community members all across the world. So that's why the program was designed to be online, so that anybody could contribute from wherever it was that they were working, or living. And that's interesting. Now I'm going to go into kind of the broader topics here, and then I will dive deeper into each of these points as we go through the presentation today. Now, the new part, one of the new things about GSoC for 2022 is that it's no longer just open to students. So in the past, it has been open to students, to just university students. And then in 2021, we also allowed folks who were recently graduated from school or from a university program or an academic program. And we also opened it up last year for folks in type of programs as well. This year, we've taken that a huge step further and are just opening it up to anybody who is new or a beginner in open source that is at least 18 years old and is in a non-embargoed U.S. country. All of you in Jamaica and Barbados and other country, Tobago? Was that the other country? I can't remember where the other country was.
Trinidad.
Oh, Trinidad. Sorry. Yeah, I got the T wrong. Sorry, Trinidad. All of you, of course, are eligible from the countries that you're in. So that kind of opens this up even wider for folks. Now, the other part of this is that this year we're adding more flexibility to the program. So in the past, you would only be able to work on a one size of project. So up until 2020 or through 2020, all the projects were about 350-hour projects. And then last year, partially due to the pandemic, we were like, there's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives. So let's make the project sizes 175 hours. And that was great for some people. Some people wanted the 350 hours. So for this year, we're bringing both options to the table. So all of our open source organizations are going to be creating project ideas that have, some of them will have 175-hour projects, some will have 350-hour projects. Many of them actually will have kind of a project idea that can be scoped to either the medium 175-hour or the larger 350-hour project, kind of based on how much work or different features get added in a particular project. So all of this I'll go into a little bit more later, but that's the general idea. Now, when I talk about a 175-hour project or 350-hour, that is an estimate. We want to give people an idea of kind of the time commitment that they need to spend during the program. And one of the other things that we're adding to kind of go with that is that normally the program has always been 12 weeks until last year we lowered it to 10 weeks since it was a smaller size project. Well, for 2022, we're making the standard size 12 weeks, but you can actually have a project anywhere from 10 weeks all the way up to 22 weeks. Now, what this does, it doesn't mean that the project is going to be any bigger. It's still going to be the 175-hour or 350-hour project. It just means that, maybe that the month of August you're getting married, or you're going to be in a wedding, or there's a family reunion, or something's going on, or maybe you have to have some surgery, and you're like, I know I'm not going to be able to focus on my GSoC project for X amount of time, X number of weeks or whatever. That's fine. Now, with this flexibility, you and your mentor can talk about that and say, okay, no worries. Instead of the standard 12-week project, we'll make yours an 18-week project. And if you finish earlier, that's great. No worries. But that way, you have this little bit of flexibility. And it also allows for, in case just something happens, you know, maybe there's a natural disaster, maybe, you know, someone in your family becomes ill, and you're just like, you know, you're something that you didn't plan for. Now you can be like, all right, I need to take a few weeks off to, you know, deal with what life thing just happened, and then I can come back, you know, in a few weeks and work on my GSoC project. And as long as you and your mentor are talking about that and they're okay with that, which in most cases they certainly will be, then they can say, okay, we wanted to do 12-week project, but now this thing happened, so now we're just going to go ahead and extend the deadline to 16, 17 weeks, whatever. So we're really excited about these different changes. These are the 3 changes to the program. Opening it up to all developers that are new or beginners to open source, so not just students anymore. And then also the different medium and large size projects. And then finally, the flexibility on the length of the coding period from the essentially 10 weeks all the way up to 22 weeks. Those are our 3 big changes to the GSoC program for 2022. So let's talk a little bit about the goals of the program. Number 1, it's really about bringing new contributors into open source software development. You know, to have new, fresh ideas coming from folks and people who are excited about being a part of these open source communities. You know, if you have the same 10 people that have been doing this for 20 years, you know, the ideas get stagnant, right? And people kind of get in a rut and they get kind of, you know, bored or whatever. So you've got to have new people coming in all the time to really give you that extra little oomph and that extra excitement to any project, but open source is a lot of times volunteers. So folks do open source, you know, they have their day job, whatever that might be, and then they come and contribute to an open source project in their evenings or weekends or whatever, because it's something that really interests them, that excites them. Now, for the projects and these organizations that are part of GSoC, for them, their goal is just to bring these new developers into their community and hopefully get the developers to stay involved in the community after their GSoC program ends. That's the ultimate goal. What you'll see a lot is that many of our mentors for GSoC are previous GSoC students themselves. It's a huge percentage every year. Usually it's anywhere from 30 to 45% at least that were students at some point in GSoC over the past, at this point, 17 years. So a lot of folks just want to pay it forward and to give back because they had such a great time learning from their mentors in GSoC. They want to give that opportunity to new folks coming into open source. Now, also for you, another reason I kind of talked about this earlier about why open source should be important for you. GSoC gives you, as a developer, exposure to real-world software development. You know, in your school, you often are working on, you know, maybe a hypothetical project or whatever, but you're not actually doing a real, or working with real source code. With these open source projects, you're writing code, and when that code gets merged, that can be used by thousands and even millions of people, depending on the project. So you're getting you get to have that real experience before you even go out and, you know, get your full-time job as a, you know, engineer, software engineer, or whatever. So you're going to learn things like testing, because oftentimes that's not taught in schools. I don't know about your universities, but I know a lot of programs across the world, they don't teach testing. And so you're going to learn about testing really quickly. You'll learn about version controls, etc. That's generally the most common one that folks use. You're going to learn a little bit about software licensing and why whatever organization you're working with uses their particular license. And then, again, distributed development. Of course, a lot of us have been doing this even more so than usual over the last 2 years, because you're really working with folks all around the world, all online, right? Again, because it's not in one the program's not set in one particular place, like physically. You have developers all across the world. And then the final ultimate goal is just creating more open source code that everybody can use. So, how does GSoC work? I'm going to kind of skim through this pretty quickly, but just to give you a broader idea of the big picture. We have these open source software projects / organizations that apply to become mentor organizations. They did that last week. So I spent the last week with my team reviewing all the applications from these mentor organizations that came in, and we decided on the ones that will be part of GSoC 2022. And so we will announce those actually this coming Monday on March 7th. So that's why we're so excited to have this presentation for y'all today, because Latifa set this up a little bit earlier in the schedule this year than we did last year, which makes it perfect timing for all of you to be able to do kind of all the steps that are going to make it much, much more likely that you get accepted into GSoC. I'm going to go into more detail on that in a couple of slides. But just know that Monday's date when we announce the organizations, that's super important. Because then you can look through all the organizations that interest you, right? Then we have these different filters. So you can go in and you can filter by coding language or programming language. So if you know Python, then you can look filter by just organizations that have projects in Python. Or if you know C++, you can filter for C++ projects. And so that's one way. The other way is we have what we call categories. So these categories are everything from infrastructure and cloud to science and medicine to security, databases, end-user applications, programming languages, kind of a whole bunch. I think we have about 10 or 11 different categories. So if you're really interested in, say, security, you can put that filter in, and then that'll filter down the 200-ish organizations down to, I don't know actually how many it is, but down to probably 30 or so or 40 who listed security as, you know, one of their categories for their project. So that's kind of how you're going to filter yourself down from 200 down to hopefully 3 or 4 or 5 that look really interesting to you. Then, once you kind of found those organizations, you reach out to them, and then you will submit a proposal. And when I say proposal, that's a part that I think kind of freaks a lot of people out. It's not like you're not writing a research paper, right? So you're not expected to write this 25-page long proposal. But you're also not just going to be submitting your resume. It's in between that. You know, often proposals are 3 to 4 pages long, sometimes 2, but, you know, 3, 4, 5 pages, depending on what the project is. You know, some projects you might want to include some sort of a graphic, so that's going to take up space. But I don't want people to get kind of caught up on the idea that a proposal is so hard, because it doesn't have to be. When you're writing a proposal, it really is about trying to figure out what the project idea that the organization has written down. They're like, hey, this is the thing we want done. And they also put kind of the expected outcomes in there. So they give you kind of a brief overview of what they're looking for. Then what you're doing when you're writing this proposal is saying, this is how I'm going to tackle this problem. This is what I would do. And then also, you know, you're going to talk about kind of why this interests you, or maybe what you've done in the past, what other things you've done that might make, you know, that make you a better candidate, because you're like, hey, I've already done this and I really enjoyed it. So that's kind of what you're doing. So it's kind of this weird cross between kind of, it's sort of like a resume, but not a resume. Don't do a resume. But it's about showing your skills and your interests. And then the key thing here, and I can't say this enough, and I'm going to say it probably 5 more times in the next 10 minutes, is you need to talk to the organizations. So you could even start doing this next week, and that would be ideal, honestly. Is you find the organizations that interest you. They all have a list of their communication methods, which could be, maybe they use Slack channel, or they use some kind of email or forum, etc. And they'll have that all listed on the site. You reach out to them and you say, hey, I'm really interested in your project. This project idea looks really interesting to me. Can we talk more about it? Right? And the thing is, they want to talk to you. And this is what I know a lot of folks get kind of nervous about, because you're like, well, am I asking a question I should be asking? Is this a stupid question? They don't want to answer my questions? That's not true, right? These organizations are part of GSoC because they want to talk to new and beginner developers about their project. They want to talk to you. That's why they're part of the program. You know, we try to choose the organizations that we know are going to be a great fit for the students and the contributors. You know, we want you to have a great experience, and so do they, right? It's in their best interest, and if you're excited about the project and working with them, and then, you know, you're more likely to stay involved in the community if you like the people you're working with, right? So, sorry, I don't know if y'all can hear that little siren going by. So that's why I can't stress enough. You want to talk to the organization early. And I say early, that means next week or even the following week. Talk to them. You know, the mentor who was probably going to work on that particular project idea is going to have, you know, a lot of comments. They're going to help guide you. Like they say, oh, well, go check this out. And, you know, read up on this information. And then you can just ask early. And I say early, that means next week or even the following week. You're building a relationship. And you're also getting that feedback to help you write your proposal, right? So if you're listening to them, you're hearing a lot of what they actually want in that proposal, right? So it actually makes it a lot easier for you to write this proposal when you talk to them. And every mentor, they tell us this every year. I say it to all the students and contributors, and the folks who listen to me have a much better experience. But you need to talk to these organizations. Communication is key. If you just go in and say, hey, this project idea looks interesting to me, I'm going to write a project proposal, I'm going to submit it, but I'm not going to actually talk to anybody in the community, none of the mentors, I'm not going to go on their Slack channel, I'm just going to submit this project proposal because it looks cool and they're going to like me because I've written down the right thing. No. The odds of you being selected have dropped significantly if you have not at least talked to the mentors once or twice. One, because again, when they're reading through your proposal, they're being like, oh yeah, this is Jane. I talked to Jane and she was asking these really cool questions. She really seemed interested in the project. Like, they're going to remember having the conversation with you versus, did anyone talk to this person? Nope, okay. Well, it looks like a decent idea, a decent proposal, but we're going to go with one of the people over here that we've actually talked to, you know, and when I say talk, I generally mean, you know, through the Slack channel or, you know, online talk, not through necessarily VC or whatever. But that's what really is the key to the program. And I just wish more people would listen to me. I'll talk about this a little bit further in a few minutes, but I want to kind of move on here. When the organizations read through all the proposals, they will then accept the contributors that they want to have for their projects. And then we have what's called a 3-week community bonding period. And that is begins May, I think, 20th. It goes to June 7th or 8th, around there. And what's going on there is basically they're just really welcoming you into the community. You're reading up on documentation. You're learning about whatever version control they're using, kind of how they're doing their different tests. Learning the project and getting ramped up. So then you can actually start coding on June 8th, 10th, somewhere around there, the beginning of the coding period. And again, the standard amount of time is about 12 weeks for the coding period, but it can be anywhere from 10 all the way up to 22 weeks. Now we'll talk a little bit quickly about the evaluation. So at 2 points in the program, at the halfway point, and then at the end of your program, you're going to have an evaluation by your mentor. This is, again, not something people should be too worried about. If you are talking to your mentor, you're working on your deadlines, y'all are communicating, you're going to pass. The people who fail are the ones who basically disappear or who just really kind of oversold their skills like a lot. And it's just very clear there's no way they're going to be able to do the project. And one thing to keep in mind is you may not necessarily finish the project that you start, but you can still pass. And oftentimes you will pass. And the reason for this is because the mentors are trying to kind of structure these projects into the 175-hour or 350-hour kind of time block. But it's kind of a best guess, right? So they could have completely been wrong. Like they thought what was a 175-hour project clearly might have been closer to a 250-hour project. But that's okay because you and your mentor are talking each week. You're doing, you're working together. You're going to realize pretty quickly, oh, this is actually more work than what we thought it was. So you'll make adjustments, right? Sometimes you'll cut things out. You may trim the project, or it may be a project that literally gets half done, and then somebody else either finishes it in the next GSoC or somebody in the community, maybe you, finishes it outside of GSoC. So that's kind of how this works. So I don't want people to get worried about the evaluations. As long as you're working hard and you're communicating, you're going to pass. And then, of course, at the end, you submit your code for everybody to be able to use. I'm going to briefly go over a couple of FAQs here. We're wrapping up the presentation, but I'm going to go over these. I know these come up a lot. I mentioned the timing of the project. Let's skip over that one. The question that comes up a lot is, I'm new to open source. Can I participate? And yes, all of you are the exact candidates these folks are looking for in their communities, right? They want people who are new or beginners in open source, right? They're not expecting you to be an expert level developer, right? They're not expecting that at all. You do need to know how to program. That we're working on for 12 weeks. You can't right? Like that's not going to work. But they're not going to be doing this for 5 years either, right? But you do need to do it for at least 6 months or so. And the other thing is, if you're looking at the project ideas for any given organization, they actually will list, most of them, not all, most will list kind of a difficulty level of the project, right? So it might be easy, intermediate, hard, difficult. And that way, that kind of can also help you. If you think, like, I'm pretty new to coding, I really probably should focus more on the easy project. Then totally be looking for the easy project. Or if you've been doing software development for a while, and you're like, no, I probably could do one of the more medium level projects, then look at those. Then, of course, a lot of the difficult ones are often, they're difficult because sometimes it just requires a very specialized knowledge base, which you may not know unless you're a PhD in whatever program, right? They can be more niche. So that's why those are considered difficult. So don't get freaked out if you happen to read a project idea and you're like, this sounds way out of my comfort zone. There's no way I can do this. That's okay. Keep looking. And also, some of the organizations just have harder projects. Their code base is more difficult, right, than other projects. So don't get frustrated if you look at a couple of organizations and you're like, whoa, that's just, that's over my head, whatever. That's okay. Keep looking. You will find something that you're comfortable with and that interests you. Asked last year. That was a great question. So don't get frustrated if you look at a couple of organizations and go, whoa, that's just. So like I said, organizations are going to talk, they're going to choose the people they've been talking to. They've built relationships that have shown interest in their project by asking questions. And, could ask questions. But there is the fine line of, am I asking two questions? And so I always try to give the guys, try to find the answer on your own, whether it is a specific question to kind of the community that may or may not be in your documentation. Try to find the answer on your own. Don't spend 2 hours looking for the answer, right? But also, if it's a question that's obviously in their FAQ or in their kind of general about page, and you didn't, look at that, you ask a question that, sometimes people are like, you could have, looked at the homepage, right? All of that information is on the homepage. I know I go that way sometimes. I'll ask questions about GSoC occasionally, but The main thing here, communicate, communicate, communicate. Before the contributor application.
Mom?
And then the other part is, the question that comes up is, do I get paid for participating in GSoC? As I mentioned, there are stipends that you receive after passing the evaluations. If you pass the first evaluation, you receive 45% stipend. If you pass the final, and I say if, like 95% of people generally pass it, right? And the ones that don't usually leave because something else has come up in their life or whatever. So you shouldn't stress yourself out about that. But anyway, the final evaluation, then you receive, if you pass that, you get the final 55%. And I mentioned the eligibility. Main things, you have to be eligible to work in the country in which you're going to be residing. So if you're going to be moving somewhere else, kind of during that June, July, August, September time frame, then you just got to make sure you're eligible to work in that country. And we also only allow folks to be a part of GSoC a total of 2 times, but you can only do that if you were a student. This can only be your second time if you were a student in 2020 or 2021. All right, the timelines here. I've highlighted the next 2 important dates. One is March 7th, which is Monday, when we announce all the organizations. And then that's the part where you just start going through all the organizations on our site, narrate it down by the various filters, looking for a few organizations that really interest you, and then going and actually applying on the program site between April 4th and April 19th. And general statistics, over 18,000 participants in 112 countries, over 17,000 mentors, and over 40 million tons of food has been produced thus far. So this is the screenshot one right here. This is also a reason why I wanted to share the slide deck with Latifa. This slide deck, if you do these things, you're going to be selected so much higher. Like I said, you read the program rules, you have the guide, computer guide, that if you were to know better, certain chapters,
Okay.
so it's not
Yes. Just in that event. No problem. Alright.
And one how to write good posts. So let me check that out before you start writing your posts. Like I mentioned, check out the organization, see the filters, and number 4, reach out to source, and then talking to them. Those are the things. You do things. I mean, you have to write a proposal, but do all of these things. You're significantly upping your chance of being selected. And then there's just little links to the program site. From the site, you have links to all the help guides, FAQ, etc., rules. So you can see all of that. Brand new, it's our first year using it. So far, it's pretty good. There will be something. And then the contributor slash guide and a blog where we send all about the program. Yes. Now we are open for questions. Sorry, it's a little longer than I wanted. I wanted to be a little shorter, but I want to make sure I reiterated the main points on really communicate. I hope I got that across. So communicate.
Yes, I think we're just gonna create some posters with that and make sure to reinforce it within the next few weeks. So if anyone has any questions, you can type them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And while I give that person time to queue up and speak, I just want to reinforce some of the things that were said. So for testing, I think UE at least has a testing course. I believe UTech also has a testing program. I know that at UE it's not mandatory. So definitely students will be able to benefit from that. And I'm sure there may be developers who aren't doing testing in their day-to-day roles. So that's definitely a great opportunity for them. For finding projects, the filtering for those persons who you can either come back to this event, but they're also in this event. So that's on our YouTube page as well. And looking forward to helping persons with proposals, of course, the sharing available to help. I'm going to have to stress talking to the organization, as well as the other tips that were given during the presentation. For the proposals, we are planning to have a follow-up meeting to do that. So that will also be earlier this year. So hopefully those who are interested can benefit from that. Okay, I see 2 questions in the chat so far. Okay, so first question. Yes, you will be provided with the slide or email after this meeting. And then for Stephanie, how many organizations can you send a proposal to?
Good question, and I just realized I didn't answer that question. You got it. Whenever I skip out a section, someone will call me on it. That's one of them. You can propose up to 3 different organizations. So you can submit 3 proposals. In theory, you can even submit 2 to this proposals to organizations based on their project ideas. Most likely, if you're talking to an organization, it's probably narrow it down to 1. But you can submit up to 3.
Can an organization accept more than 1 person proposal? Yes, but other answer.
Yeah, and there's actually a couple parts to that. So, yes. The question I talk about often is, well, what if 2 different organizations really like me and they both want to submit my proposal? That does happen. Out of the 1,200 to 1,300 students we accept each year, it happens about the same time. So, it's not like it's one of those things that happen a lot. But it's basically, this year, the way it'll work is essentially our AI will kind of select. Well, actually, technically, it's based on which organization ranks you higher. And if they both happen to rank you number 2 for their elections, then they basically randomly choose. But the other part of that is, yes, a lot of organizations will have, most organizations have 1 student. Occasionally, a couple small organizations might just have 1 student. Most will have 2 to 20. So there'll be other students and contributors that are going to be participating in your work. So you'll get to know them really well, right? And so, again, you're not going to be working on the same project, but you will be working on this with the same organization. And probably will have often similar questions. You can also help each other.
Yes, key takeaway from that is that there's lots of opportunities. Next question is, what are the chances of given the amount of applicants on average? Are we expected to develop, or is there an option to be a QA tester on the team? So, this question is, are you going to be working on specialized functional areas?
Yes, good question. Both are good questions. I'll answer the first one. So, chances of getting accepted. Generally, about, it depends each year, right? And this year it's kind of a wild guess because we don't know how folks are going to react to, hey, now we've got all these expanded, flexible timelines. A lot of people did say pass because they're like, oh, well, this June to early September, and now they know that they can extend it. That might be quite a few people. But generally around 20%-ish get accepted. I think last year we had a little over 5,000 students submit applications. Some of them submitted 2 or 3 proposals. And then we accepted, I think, 1,292. So yeah, so just under 1,300. So yeah, so that's about 20, actually less more than 20%, about 25%. So yeah, it just depends, right? We don't know unless now we have multiple side projects. Oh, one thing to keep in mind, and like I said, I just reviewed all these organization applications. I'm going to get to the hours. My weekend was not fun. But anyway, reviewing this, I saw the project ideas, right? And what I think people should keep in mind is a lot of people, well, sorry, think about the stipend to bring this up. So with the stipend, if you're doing the larger project, then you would get, like for example, I think for Jamaica, the stipend amount is $100 for the 175-hour project, so then it's double that for the 350, so it's 3,000 for US dollars for the 350-hour project, right? So some people do GSoC for the money. So they're going to be trying to get the larger project. So what I would say is, it depends on what your time schedule and stuff is, but I think there can be less competition for the smaller project. So if that seems like a better fit for you, definitely try to get the smaller project. I think 110-hour project. Because I suspect there's going to be less competition. I could be wrong, but I'm very confident that's how it's going to play out. And then for your, are we expected to develop? Yes, so this is third code, so this is a coding program. You will be doing some testing. For the feature you're building or whatever it might be, but it is predominantly a coding project. Now, that being said, we have a season of docs. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but if any of you are interested in becoming tech writers or are more interested in kind of that part, or you're really good writers, you have this tech background and you might want to be a tech writer, Season of Docs, Romina actually is taking that over, and that program is actually starting around the same time as GSoC. So check that out. And tech writers are always in high demand for companies, and Google's always hiring. There we go. Okay, thank you for me. Google's always hiring tech writers. Many other companies are too. So if writing really interests you and you're really good at kind of organizing things, that's kind of how your mind works, consider tech writing. But again, that you can't do. That's not what we're going to do for Dual Summer Code. But check out our Season of Docs program. So kind of help you that way. Kadine's question. I think you're muted. Like, you were muted. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so yes, over 1,000 students accepted to the last program, over 20%. So again, you should all apply. The next question from Khabib is, will you work solely with your mentor?
That's a good question. So often you're not always one mentor. Most cases you're gonna have 2 or 3. So one will kind of probably be your primary, and then the other 2 will sometimes back up, but also sometimes they just have more understanding of maybe certain parts of your project. So, you could end up having 2 or 3 that are just always helping you, like different time zones and stuff. So it really kind of ends, but at least one mentor, often 2 or 3. And the cool thing is, this is a community. You want to ask a question that's more of I think maybe not necessarily a generic question, but a question that probably someone in the community could answer. Or like, hey, how do I get to this? Or hey, does anybody have a good tip on doing this? You can just ask it to the entire community in that project. Somebody will answer you, right? The cool thing is, because people are so spread out across the world, you could be asking the question in Jamaica, and then somebody in Australia could be responding to you. If they're awake, or the people in Europe are asleep, so you can, maybe your mentors in Europe, so they're not online right now, but these other folks are. So keep that in mind, because our organizations really try to make it like GSoC a real community effort, and they really want, their developers and their contributors to come in and be helping all of our GSoC contributors to understand more about the project and, just to help them out. So I can't stress it enough. They want you to succeed. So that's another reason why I tell them, don't worry about not passing your evaluation. If you're doing the work and you're showing you're trying, that's what they care about. And you're communicating with them, right? So it's not like you're taking a regular, test at school or whatever. I missed 80% of the questions or whatever, right? You don't need to worry about that. Just be talking to them. And mentors are there to also help you adjust maybe your milestones. So maybe the two of you doing the community body kind of figure out, okay, this is kind of the plan. These are what we're going to do over the next, month, and then at the 8-week mark, 10-week, and then you realize, okay, this doesn't make sense, or hey, this week is going faster than we thought. Okay, and you'll make adjustments, right? So it's very flexible. I keep using the word flexible because that's kind of the key this year, like flexibility, and just making it easier for you because they want you to succeed. So remember that they want you to succeed, and they want to welcome you into their communities.
Yes, I agree. Most programs and most international programs, at the end of the day, growth of the developer is what is important. And if we're gonna have more persons contributing to our open source community, then we definitely need to prioritize growth. And so you need to not worry more about whether you are learning than whether you are finishing. Yes. We go ahead.
That's a great point, because one of the other things that comes up often, people will say, well, what if my code isn't merged? Will I still get my stipend? And yes, because sometimes the code won't be merged just because either the project ends up, they kind of change course, or maybe it didn't get completed, or whatever. Which is always kind of a bummer if you're the person, you're like, I want to see my code being used by you, right? But occasionally it does happen. Most of the time that's not what happens. But it does happen. But it also doesn't mean that you're not going to get paid. You're going to get stipend. You've been doing the work. It's not your fault. The other thing is sometimes, some of the organizations have very specific release dates, so maybe it's not going to actually get, it's not going to get merged into the next release for 4 months or whatever it might be, right? So keep that in mind as well.
Yes. Shaim asks, will we be guided if we're accepted to a project that uses programming languages that we're not familiar with?
So you want to apply. Most projects will use probably multiple programming languages. Like it's probably not going to be just solely Python. I mean, some of them will. It just really depends on what the project that you choose. But you will, as part of your proposal, kind of should make it clear as to what programming languages you're comfortable with. And then you can also say, I know a little bit about C++, but that's not really my cup of tea. But then as long as you're kind of willing to learn, and they can, like you said, they can kind of point you in the direction, then that's fine. But you shouldn't apply to a project that's like, hey, this is all in Python. I don't really know Python. You don't want to do that, because that's not going to set you up for success, right? So pick the project that is the language that you know is the best, and then a lot of projects will have some secondary language that they use. That again, you can have that discussion if you're talking to the mentors during the month of March. Like I highly recommend you do. You can kind of say, well, this says that you also need C++. You're like, I know some C++. I'm not really that familiar with it. Kind of, is that okay? How involved is this? Is this just kind of like, okay, you just need to know the basics? Okay, that's fine. Or something that you can learn pretty quickly versus needing kind of extensive knowledge. And some of the project ideas even spell that out. They're like, you need some basic C++, right, or basic Python, whereas some might need a little more complex understanding.
Okay. Our next question from Mark: is there a mailing list that we can register for to get direct updates about GSoC, and are there any success stories of participants getting job offers or other companies post?
I just want to say this again. I remember saying this last year. Y'all all have really good questions. Sometimes I get presentations and the questions are, but all of your questions are all very good. I remember you all having great questions last year too. So yes, there is a mailing list. It's for me to. Can you find the? Oh yeah. Okay. Can you grab the link for the GSoC assessment? You have a chance. So we have a discussion list that you can join, whatever. And then if you're accepted as a GSoC contributor, then we have the contributor/student list. So that's all just people who were students or contributors in the past or this year. So that's a list where people ask kind of general questions. And then we make our announcements and stuff on the discussion list. You'll see some general conversations going on in the discussion list. And then, we have some ideas about other figure minutes. There we go. And that is just a Google Groups link for that discussion list. Now, as far as each individual organization, they definitely are going to have, again, whether it's Slack channel, discourse, whatever. Like they're going to have, sometimes they have 2 or 3, but just read their site, because they'll also, a lot of them will also give you a template of like what they want your proposal to look like, right? When they do that, that makes your life even that much easier. It's like, oh, okay, do these things, boom, 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 right? So just read their instructions. And some of them don't. Some of them require maybe doing one small pull request, and that's mostly, I think, just so that they know, folks have some knowledge, right? And so that's kind of like their way to kind of weed out the people who are just, I wouldn't say kind of trying to spam them, but kind of the people who are just like, oh, this looks cool, but they don't actually, code or anything. They're just like, oh, I want to get accepted in GSoC, which it's very odd when people try to do that. Like, well, you've got to write a proposal and stuff, so you got to do a little bit of work to even get accepted at that point. But then your other part, yes. So this is something that we're actually working on with our marketing person. A ton of people have been GSoC students. We did a student summit last year. Ravina helped organize that. It was great. It was our first one. And we had, I think we did 5 or 6 talks with just people we had handpicked that were former GSoC students. Some of them, like one of them, has been one of the core developers for Drupal for 14, 15 years. A lot of people have gone on to become Googlers as software engineers or as site reliability engineers. We see folks getting internships at Google, and again, and Microsoft and Facebook. So like my LinkedIn page is all over the place. I also ran the Google Coding, the high school program we used to run, and so I am on LinkedIn with a lot of those students from that program, and so I see all kinds of stuff. But yes, a lot of success stories. A lot of people go on to create their own open source projects. But yes, there's tons. I mean, there's so many, and that's kind of part of the thing. It's like, well, we have so many. Where do we start? Where do we start telling the story? So that is part of our plan for this year, is to try to do some videos and some kind of more documentation to kind of highlight a bunch of those stories for folks. I get thousands. That's what I miss about being able to travel, because I would be able to travel across the world and meet people in person, and have people come up to me at conferences and say, hey, I was a GSoC student in 2007, and this changed my life, and I got to do this, and which is super cool. It's very inspiring. It makes me want to keep doing my job. So I look forward to the world when we get back to having those in-person connections, and I can hear those stories and just see how excited folks are to have been a part of the program. And many of them go on, like I said, be mentors themselves.
Certainly, and of course, if anyone here doesn't know, Shane was both a student as a participant in GSoC and a mentor. So if you're looking for someone to tell you what being a mentor is like, or if you're interested in mentoring for an organization, then he can tell you what that process is like. And of course, that also means that if you get through as a student, you also have the opportunity to mentor, as Stephanie just mentioned. Okay, so it's really great. I'm looking forward to seeing those success stories as well. I think that would be very good for just giving persons more of a feel and encouraging more persons to join on to the program and be more interested in the open source community.
Exactly, and that's what I'm looking forward to, Ravina. Because for years, we've been very short-handed for years, and so they were super excited to be able to hire Ravina to come in and help with this. So she and I are working together. This is one of the first things we talk about. Is this and our marketing folks. So it's on this obviously not going to be done before April, but it is on our plan. So for next year, hopefully when we do this call next year, we'll have a whole, whether it's video or cool graphics on our website or whatever, both. We'll have something to share.
Nice. Okay, so our next question from Valdec, is it restricted to students? It's definitely not. It was previously, but this year GSoC is open to all persons over the age of 18. The next question, another question from Mark, is GSoC going to have workshops, or will most of the learning be with or mentor while working on the project?
Yeah, good question. It is going to be essentially working with or the community on this project. We don't have workshops. That's an interesting idea, actually. But I think part of it is so many projects they're so different, right? So kind of each project kind of has its own things. Although it would be interesting to see if maybe we could do something around, like, even if we did a workshop about, you know, getting familiar with GitHub or some testing stuff. Like, that's an idea that, like, okay, that's interesting. Nobody had really worded
Yes,
it.
kudos to Mark for that great idea.
Yeah, I like that. I'm like, okay, again, this will not happen this year, but that is a good thing for us to write down for the future. Like that.
Okay, and I don't see any more questions in the chat as yet. So let me just give everyone a bit more time. Let's see if we're done. That would be good, because then we would end before 7:30. I hope that everyone has gotten a good overview of what GSoC is about and how you can prepare for this year. As Stephanie said so many times, the key, or one of the key things to do, is to start communicating with the organizations early, before April 4th. Cannot stress that enough. And Stephanie, we're definitely going to have to take all of these questions and add them to the document I shared with you earlier, as well as pushing out those answers to those persons who are not on this call, just to make sure that everyone has those answers. Thank you all again for your great questions. I know that Stephanie really appreciates it, so that's good. I think we have another. Okay. Ramina says, question from the YouTube chat. Thank you, Ramina. Beginners with only HTML and CSS knowledge, can they still participate?
Yes, you're probably much more limited on actual projects. But I would suspect there are still some that you can find. Again, use the filter to look through that. I mean, a lot of them are requiring, again, whether it's C++ or Python. Throwing those two out, those seem to be more popular. Python,
Yeah.
Rust is starting to become more popular. But yeah, all of these different languages. I think, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I think I can find a few. Most of them probably are going to require like more like Python or C++. But that is a good question.
Let me also ask about JavaScript, because I know a lot of developers in the Jamaican states are web developers. So is JavaScript also one of the popular options?
Yes, it is. Yeah. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, yeah. Again, I looked at all these project ideas, and so one of the things we look at is what languages they're using. Yes, JavaScript is another one that's at the top there. Yeah.
And I'm sure that puts a lot of persons on this call at you. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mention that initially. I don't know why I default to Python. That's just one I default to.
And we have one more question from Mark. Is there a list of fields and areas that are going to have projects in GSoC for, and any idea of which areas are usually more saturated?
Good question. I'm not sure it's so much areas as far as like which I think by that meaning like categories and stuff. I think like security or science and medicine or end user apps or whatever. I would say there's certain organizations that are just going to get a ton of applications. TensorFlow is super popular. It's it's kind of one of the things right now, right? So and a great bunch of people, great community, and they usually get quite a few, but they get a lot of applications, right? So my advice to folks would be, go in, find a few organizations. Also looking at some of these smaller organizations. There's the big organizations, like there's the Apache Software Foundation and Python Software Foundation. There's CERN. There's Linux Foundation. Those organizations all act as what we call umbrella organizations, and they basically have these sub organizations underneath them. If that makes sense. So maybe Python has actually 20 or 15 different smaller organizations that are, Python projects underneath them. And each of those projects might accept 1 or 2 students. So that's kind of how that works. So while Python may get 30 students, it's because there's all these sub-projects under them. Versus a project like, I don't know, LibreOffice. I'm not sure about that, but LibreOffice. So it's going to get, maybe they get 4 or 5 students, right? But that is all for like LibreOffice projects. So this sounds kind of silly, but it's kind of like the really, really hard projects are going to be really super popular with other people applying to, right? So your competition higher.
Yes.
And also, in some ways, some of the smaller projects you might, there's less competition, in theory, less competition. Although sometimes you look at it as, well, they're only going to accept 2 or 3 students, and if they get 30 applications, but you won't know how many applications they get, right? But looking at some of these smaller organizations is often a really good thing to do, because they also are super excited about being accepted into GSoC, and they really want to welcome you and really, want to, not to say the others don't, but it's just like they really want to put out kind of a red carpet to you and like really bring you in the community. But we also have some of these organizations that have been participating for 17 years, and they're great. They've been doing this. They know how to do it. They know how they've got their onboarding documentation great and all set up. And so, URLCAT, some of the others, and RTIMS, these folks have been doing it for many, many years. That know, like they also participated in the high school program. So they realized early on, you gotta get your documentation up to speed for new folks in the community, which makes it super helpful for you. So that's one of the other things to kind of look at if you're looking at organizations. You go to their site and you're like, oh, they've got information. I can read, I can understand kind of what's going on, versus it's just if it's like more like a link to a GitHub repository or something. You're kind of like, where is there any documentation? Like that might be kind of not a red flag. You're kind of going, maybe this is not the one I want to go with right now, right? You're like, well, let's look at these others that have a little better documented so we understand what the project does and kind of where it's going. That's something that I brought up last year. That about a good point. I wish I'd known at the beginning kind of what the project leaders thought, like the meeting, the community, right? Like what was their kind of future for the project, right? They know what's going on right now, but like what's kind of the goal, right? Which I thought was interesting. Nobody had even mentioned that before. That's actually a really valid point. Like, yeah, that's something that organizations should kind of be talking to their new GSoC contributors about. Like, hey, this is kind of what we're doing now. This is where we see it in the future. Or this is where we want to go with this project. Because some of the projects have been around for 20 years. Some have been around for 10. Some are around for 2 years. So they're all different stages of development.
Yes, that's definitely a good position and a good point. I mean, good position. And we also got some other helpful pointers for how to choose products, so that's good. I think, just to chip in with that again for those persons, just in case it's not documented, I mean, you want to know that it's documented for some persons, especially if you're near the beginner end of the spectrum. And then again, for those persons who, even if you're not at the beginner end or there isn't as much documentation, that's one more reason for you to start communicating early with the organizations, because if you think that you're not sure from what they put out publicly where their project is going, then that would be a good question for you to ask them. Maybe it prompts them to think about the direction they're going in, or to add that for other persons benefit.
Yes. You do a great job of summarizing it for me. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's it. I'm not sure if we touched on which areas are usually more saturated. Oh, well, I guess that would be the larger projects that are.
Yeah. That's really kind of the only way I think I can answer the question, right? And one other thing is, Latifa, I did put on the slide deck, because I know that slide deck might get shared elsewhere, but I'm happy if you want to share my email address with folks that are in this call. And I'll be thinking y'all. I mean, I can put it in here. I'll put it in the chat, right? Well, actually, and we'll go for live too. Not for live stream. Okay. So, so y'all can email me directly too if you have more questions. Last year, a few people did email me, which is great. And then some of them kept in touch well into actually earlier this year. So that was cool. So please do contact me if you have questions.
Awesome. So you can send this out on Meetup. So most of the persons here would have registered on meetup.com. So I'll also send that out on our Meetup discussion page. I think that will cover us. No more questions. I'm not seeing any more questions on YouTube. So hopefully we've covered all of your concerns. And we're looking forward to having more applications. Last year we had the most ever applications from the Caribbean. So we're looking to have not only more applications, but also accepted applicants this year. So again, start early, start communicating with orgs. And if you have any concerns, as usual, as mentioned before, you can email Stephanie, you can message myself or Shane, and we will be having more sessions on our YouTube page. Let me just drop this link in the chat as well. We do have other sessions that we've already hosted. So just our general informational session, which with information from last year, which would be rendered mostly redundant, made redundant by this session. But we also have our session on how to find and choose projects. And coming up in March, we will be addressing tips for writing the proposal. Shane will go over his proposal that he submitted, and you can ask any questions that you have, any more questions that you have at that time. So we're hoping to see more of you at those events, or more of you interacting with the live stream videos, and of course, more persons applying and hopefully being accepted to do summer code this year, so you can also tell your stories next year. Thank you again, Stephanie and Romina.
Thank you, everybody. This has been great. But like I said, feel free to email me. Yeah, we look forward to having more of you involved, and definitely getting more of you accepted, because like Latifa said, we want you to be one of the success stories that we highlight next year, right? So and good luck. And again, communicate. I can't say enough.
Right. So with that, we're going to close off this event. There are no more questions. So again, as a reminder, if you have questions, you can reach out to us on our socials or in the developer groups. Of course, for Jamaican developers, we have our Telegram group, and some of you may be joining from other groups such as Meta Dev Circles or GDG Kingston. And so we're hoping, do message us if you have any questions, and we'll try as best as possible to respond. And before I close out, let me just give final shout out to our sponsors, Gsoft Limited, Vertis Technology Solutions, and Particular Presence Technologies. And with that, we'll adjourn. I'll see you all at the next event, which is for WordPress event for the month of March next week, Thursday. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening. Please keep safe. Don't catch COVID, or try as best as possible not to catch COVID. And we'll see you in our other session.